Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our interview with Drapper and Lindsay Holmwood. Dan is a CEO and founder of CipherStash, and Lindsay is a chief product officer of the same company. And CipherStash is a data storage platform for sensitive data. Their platform uses searchable encryption technology to protect against attacks. Dan is a seasoned cryptography engineer whose goal is to equip all developers with the skills they need to create safe applications. And Lindsay came of a software engineer background and DevOps. Dan is developed kind of a film for executive producer of Debugging diversity. So he will explain us later. That explores why there are so few women in technology, as well as what may be done to change that. So Dan and Lindsay, thank you for coming to our interview today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. So let's first ask Dan. Could you tell us, Dan, can you tell us a short story about your career path, what brought you to where you are right now, and what you guys at CipherStash are up to these days?
Certainly, yeah. That's we've only got a short show, so I'll try to cover it quickly. Look, I've been a software engineer my whole life. I started programming computers when I was a young teenager, 13, 14, and this was back in the days when, you know, when you're learning to code, most people these days rely on the internet. There was no internet. I had no internet at home when I was learning how to program computers as a kid. And so it was a very different world. But it was a fruitful interest, and it led to I think, a very interesting and rewarding career. I've worked for companies here in Australia. I've worked for a company in the US, spent some time in New York. And on a huge variety of different industries, healthcare, education, recruitment, even government. But over the last several years in particular, I think this, we've had a much higher awareness as an industry of data security challenges and how to manage encryption and so forth. And it's become a particular interest of mine. And so these days I describe myself as a cryptography engineer, not just a software engineer. And several years ago, when I was the chief technology officer of a company here in Sydney, in Australia, and we were selling to large corporations, and those corporations were understandably asking us, "How are you protecting the data which we are entrusting you?" And we would, fill out vendor questionnaires and answer all of the many tough questions that they would ask us. And we got to the point where they were satisfied. We would meet their requirements, but I was never satisfied, frankly. I never felt like we were doing enough to protect data. And this was not a reflection of the company, nor of the team, but of the technology that was available. And it really comes down to this kind of core issue. When you store data in a database, and as a consumer, you might be unaware that this is happening, but every time you buy a pair of jeans, every time you apply for a loan, every time you make an appointment with a doctor, your data is going into a database somewhere. And developers do the best that they can to protect the data that they store in those databases. But they're faced with a really tricky question. On the one hand, they could encrypt that data to fully protect it. They can encrypt it, lock it up, use good ciphers and keys, and they can protect it. But of course, as soon as they do that, they can no longer search that data. So very simple queries that we now take for granted, like find me the patient that has this social security number, or find me all patients over the age of 40. If all the data is encrypted, I can't do that anymore. And so this is what led to the development of CipherStash. It took me personally on a long journey of discovery and education. And now what we have is what we call a searchable encrypted data store, or searchable encrypted data index, if you like. And so this is a search index similar to tools like Elasticsearch, if some of your audience know that stack, but it's now working on completely encrypted data, and it is itself encrypted. So that means if a developer is building a system that is encrypting sensitive data, say patient records or financial information, they can use CipherStash using searchable encryption to maintain the searchability of that data, despite the fact that it's now being encrypted. So they get the opportunity to significantly improve security, but without the drawbacks that often come, or virtually always come, with encryption.
Fantastic. So maybe let's ask Lindsay, because you are more on the technical side, on product side. Can you explain a little bit for more for risk managers among our audience, not on the technical details, but for them how it works, and is it kind of additional application on already existing, or how it works? Maybe just introduce yourself as well. What is your background? Okay.
Yeah, so my name's Lindsay. I'm the Chief Product Officer here at CipherStash. I decided to join Dan on this crazy journey because I realized that he sort of made this pretty significant technical breakthrough, being able to take a bunch of really interesting research from academia and actually package it up into a format that is actually usable for everyday folks. Everyday folks mostly being sort of, systems engineers and software engineers and whatnot. But yeah, so I quit my job last year and joined CipherStash. And if you told me at the beginning of the pandemic that I was going to end up working at a database company in the year of our Lord 2021, I would have said that you're absolutely crazy. Very few people quit their jobs and go work in databases these days. But yeah, look, the thing that was really interesting about what the sort of nut that Dan had managed to crack was that he'd taken this research from academia and got it working inside sort of a traditional database to actually show that you can really actually encrypt this data in a way that is then we on the CipherStash side, we don't actually ever see any of the data in plain text. We only ever see the ciphertext or the queries that you send to us for the typical sort of queries that you'd be doing. They are also entirely encrypted as well. So we get to do all these operations on the data in the blind. And the thing that's really interesting there from a risk management perspective is that it's a completely different tool or a completely different control that you have available to you when you think about managing sensitive data and the risks around that. Typically when we're thinking about databases, and we often see it from a compliance perspective as well. There's that checkbox of are you encrypting your data at rest? And typically, that's as deep as you really go on that question. But it's sort of framed in a world that doesn't really exist anymore. Where full disk encryption was really important for keeping this data safe was when your threat model included people, stealing disks out of servers, right? And that's not really the world that we live in these days. Cloud has completely changed the landscape there. It's very rare that you'll have an attacker go in and pull a disk out of an Amazon server that's sitting in Amazon or Azure or whatever. So, we haven't really updated our controls, and that was sort of the big picture vision that got me interested, because it's, okay, we actually have a bunch of tools that haven't really been available to us from a technology perspective. It's, it's brand new tech, but it's built on, it's a novel implementation of existing cryptography. So it's not reinventing the world, it's just using the existing tech in sort of an interesting way. And it gives people who worry about data security and maintaining that data sensitivity a whole bunch of additional tools to be able to do that.
So a question to Dan, what are the major business cases that your solution solves? And for example, maybe you can take some examples without naming the names if you want, just to understand.
Certainly, yeah. So I think the main business cases that we've explored and we have are working with on customers now, probably three that I'll share with you. The first is really very simple, sort of this idea of replacing the users table in your application. So if you're a software team and you're building an application, it could be a financial services business, or it could be even an e-commerce business, and you're storing all of your customer data or your user data in a table in a database, you can use CipherStash essentially just to replace that one table. So we're not trying to get companies to replace their entire database. It's I think of it like a database is like the concrete foundations in a skyscraper. It's very difficult for you to replace that. So we're just taking one thin slice of your data, which is a very the most sensitive data, and encrypting that using CipherStash. So protecting, you might call that PII, personally identifiable information, email addresses, phone numbers, dates of birth, things like that. And then to take that one step further, we're helping companies address challenges with things like HIPAA compliance in the health industry. And so that's when we're starting to think about things like PHI, so protected health information. And so that can include things like not only your name, email address, and age and things like that, but also your, what drugs you're taking, your social security number, Medicare number, things like your weight and height. Those kinds of details are also required to be encrypted by the HIPAA standard. And then the final one, which is quite interesting, is this idea of secure form capture. So if companies are collecting sensitive data on their website, they, particularly in, say, government contexts or healthcare settings, when some of those forms capture quite a lot of sensitive data. People don't often think about what they're sending in these forms. You get passport numbers, driver's license numbers, sensitive health information. And so we're working with some customers now that are using CipherStash to encrypt the data as soon as it's captured in the form, and then remains locked up until an authorized user who's been given access to the key to decrypt the data is able to query and to retrieve that form information. And we're doing this inside existing technologies that developers are already building applications with. So currently we support the Ruby language and the Ruby on Rails framework. It's very common in the software development space, and Node.js and the related JavaScript and TypeScript languages. So if you're building applications in those languages, we've designed a software development kit and a set of tools that allows developers to integrate CipherStash into their existing applications very, very quickly, or also, of course, build new applications that are based on CipherStash from the outset.
Fantastic. All right, let's ask Lindsay. Lindsay, because we just discussed before in the interview, because software is eating the world, as they say, and developers like to develop software, and majority of them have some understanding of risk management. So from kind of business risk management understanding, how would you introduce this culture of risk management in the software development team?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we sort of need to start with the basics of, when we sort of think about this, one of the things that I worry about is like how well do developers like understand what the controls are, but also like what are the underlying risks that they are trying to put the controls in to defend against, right? And unfortunately, within the software engineering practice as an industry as a whole, it's really only recently that devs are really starting to think more about data security in particular. Typically, most organizations are incentivizing software engineers and people from technical backgrounds to focus on functionality and performance when they are building systems. And of course, you can sprinkle a little bit of Dunning-Kruger in here as well, because people are overconfident in things that they are unskilled at. And so they often self-assess their ability at being able to build secure systems as being a lot better than what it actually is. And unfortunately, when you dig down into it, most cryptography bugs actually come down to like the use of the tools themselves, not the actual tool. So there was some interesting research a couple of years ago by Lazar et al. It's called "Why Does Cryptographic Software Fail?" And it basically found that 83% of all cryptographic bugs actually come from the improper use of cryptographic libraries. So it's the bugs are actually happening in people's applications and the systems that they are building on top of these sort of cryptographic primitives. So there's really a big gulf here from where people think that they are at and where the industry actually is itself. So part about building tools like CipherStash and sort of your secure searchable encryption is about packaging it in such a way that is sort of misuse resistant. So it's difficult to use it in a way that is insecure. So you think that you're using it securely, but you're actually not. And also, providing heaps of examples about how to actually use the thing securely as well. That's it's a really difficult thing to actually do well. And like that's sort of how our real focus is, do the basics well. And it all just comes down to misuse resistance and making things really easy to use.
Interesting. So Dan, you are also an executive producer of Debugging Diversity, right? Is it kind of film that explores about why there are so few women in technology? Could you please kind of explain us what is it, and why is the lack of diversity and inclusion in the technology space makes so effect in our lives?
Absolutely. There's a lot to unpack here. I think it's worth firstly touching on, well, why is diversity in technology important? We can certainly talk about why there aren't many women in tech, for example, or people of color, or people from minority groups. But why is that important? And I think at a fundamental level, technology powers everything we do. I don't know about you, Boris, but I can't do anything without using technology in some way. I'm using my phone or my laptop, or the navigation system in my car, or whatever it is. There's technology in everything I do. And all of this technology is created by somebody, well, teams of people. And the people who are creating that technology are essentially defining our lives. They're defining the future of our society. Do we want the people that are creating those teams to only represent one small group of society? Or do we want all of society to be represented in the teams that create technology? And I'll give you one really interesting example. So the Apple released the Apple Watch a few years ago. I think I've got a Series 7, I think. But I think it was about Series 4 where the Apple Watch got a new feature. And it was the first time that such a feature had existed in the Apple Watch. And I remember my wife got quite excited about it. It was female cycle tracking. Now, the question is, why did it take until Series 4 to include a feature that roughly half of the world's population would use? Well, quite simply, because the team was all men. Nobody thought of it. Nobody even considered it. You think about the kinds of technology that is making decisions on our behalves about, decisions about whether or not you can get a loan, or decisions about, whether you might go to prison. There's technology that's doing that now. If the technology is being created by one set of people, one demographic, one group, what kinds of biases might that technology include? In fact, there was a study done a couple of years ago about a technology that was helping judges make judgments in criminal prosecution situations. And the system was trained on data from the 50s and 60s, when some of the Jim Crow laws still existed. And you can imagine that this is in the US, the outcome of those decisions were, let's just say they were not the kinds of decisions that a judge in 2022 would make. And so I think it's incredibly important that we have diversity in the technology, not just in the people that are creating, but also in the data that's fed into it. So then the next question you might ask is, well, how do we change that? And this is why I created this TV show, Debugging Diversity. Episode 1 is available now, by the way. You can have a look at it at debuggingdiversity.com. And it's intended to be a series to help explain what are some of the things that everyday folks, whether they're in the engineering industry or not, can do to try to encourage more people to explore technology as a career, and how we can retain more, particularly women, in the industry once they've decided to take it up as an opportunity.
Okay.
There's a lot to uncover there.
We will put this website URL on our show notes, so people can
Certainly.
have a look. Okay, Lindsay, because we are running out of time, maybe you can, one of the last questions, can you tell us what's something you or your team have recently achieved that you're really proud of?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to Dan's point, we're growing and expanding our team at the moment, so it's to be bringing folks in from a whole bunch of different backgrounds to sort of provide that bigger context about the sort of problems that we're helping people solve. I think probably from a technical perspective, we're really excited about the Ruby client that Dan mentioned just before. Ruby on Rails as a technology is used in a heap of different places. The first versions of Twitter were built on it. Lots of big sites on the internet were built with it. So the fact that we've been able to so quickly be able to build a version of CipherStash that works for that language ecosystem has been really fantastic.
Mm. So if it's, for example, if risk managers should, for example, have 1 or 2 takeaways take from this interview, what would it be?
Yeah, so I think that the big thing to keep in mind here is that a lot of the traditional ways that we assess threats and what our threat models are for data and sensitive data and how we protect that aren't really valid anymore. We really need to update our priors about what those things are, because typically a lot of these controls are focused on protecting disks and servers, and the cloud has sort of completely changed that. In fact, like cloud misconfigurations were actually accounted for, I think it was 14% of all data breaches last year, which is sort of wild when you think about it. And so, not only is the landscape change of the sort of the risk model that you've got to handle and who the threats are that you're trying to defend against, but there's also a whole bunch of new and interesting technology that is coming to market that has sort of been brewing in academia for the last couple of decades, really. And it's just reached a point where it's actually usable. It gives you a whole bunch of extra controls and defenses that you can put in place to sort of handle those new threats that have really emerged. So, do a bit of the research, have a look into, technologies like CipherStash and what we're doing with searchable encryption. It's a bit of a game changer for how you think about how you go about defending these sort of attacks.
Okay,
One other thing,
yeah.
Can I just add to that very quickly? One other thing that we think about a lot in when we're building applications that protect data better and how we think about risk in that sense is this idea of shifting left. So when you come across when you have a data breach or there's some security exploit and it's already out in the wild and it's being taken advantage of, it's far too late. That the impact is massive and the likelihood is high. When you have this idea of shifting left, which is either detecting problems much earlier in the software development lifecycle, or even using technologies that eliminate those class of issues entirely, then the likelihood is much lower. You capture these issues far sooner in the process, and the impact is significantly lower as well. So thinking about that through a risk management lens, this idea of shifting left is incredibly important.
Fantastic. So that's where all my questions. Maybe last one for Dan or for both of you, because I'm running global risk community, and for us it's important to know how we can better contribute to this complex world of risk management. So just a few tips for you from you guys.
Lindsay, you want to have a crack at that?
Sure, I'll take a crack at it. One of the techniques that we find ourselves using quite often is sort of planning poker for sort of assessing the risks and really using sort of Bayesian inference there to go, what do you assess that risk to be, and how confident are you in that? Having those sort of really simple framing devices for those conversations about risk is really interesting in uncovering different understandings and assumptions and constraints about the different risks that you're managing. So, really simple tool of, just saying how roughly, what do you think the impact is going to be, and what do you think the likelihood of that, and how confident are you about that? Really simple tool, but it's the sort of thing that can really change the game when you're having conversations inside your organization about, how you're approaching risk, and really building that shared understanding of what the risks are and how we might work together to defend them.
Okay, fantastic, guys. Thank you very much, and I hope I wish you a very great success with your company, and we hope we will probably have another interview with a few months and check with you about your progress and how is it going.
Right. Thanks so much for having us, Boris.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Boris.
Bye-bye.